topic for today, which is basically talk about identity protection and governance. What we left out in the last session was hybrid identity. So we'd start with that, then we'd move on to identity protection and governance within Azure. So let's get to it. So the idea behind hybrid identity is to give room for organization that still needs to be able to use their legacy identity management system, which is basically Active Directory on premise. We set the identity management service that you have in the cloud is Azure Active Directory, even though you have several other options like Azure Active Directory domain service. So there's a difference between Azure Active Directory and Azure Active Directory domain service. So you have Azure AD. I have the Azure Active Directory domain service. There are two different things. This guy is a software as a service. This guy is a platform as a service. Where this is you just consuming identity services of the cloud platform, primarily through non-standard protocols, more or less like using REST APIs, SOAP, and the rest of them like that. While this is still your normal Active Directory, but the management of the servers, the infrastructure, and the likes is responsibility of the provider. So what you are doing is just consuming it. So you just go there, add your domain, create your users, your group policy, and the likes. All those stuffs, the organization you need, they still apply, but you don't get to manage the domain controller yourself. So that is a platform as a service, but this is the predominant or probably the most common you'd come across. So when you are going to the cloud, this is your target, but in situations where there's still need for you to maintain on-premise service, and while you still want to enjoy the service you have in the cloud, then you do hybrid. So we'll look at how to set up your hybrid using any of these two agents. We'll look at what are the authentication options that are available, and the three major authentication options as pass-through, password hash, federation. Then how do you decide on which you should use? Then we'll talk about write back, which is a very good option when you have an hybrid environment. So in establishing an hybrid setup, Microsoft had made this tool called Azure AD Connect available. Azure AD Connect is actually an agent or an application that you typically install on any server within your environment, and that server helps to establish the link between your on-premise Active Directory infrastructure and the cloud. So, and you can use this setup to provide identity services, which includes authentication, authorization, and the likes for any of your application within the cloud, either Office 365, Azure itself, or even third-party applications like SAP, even Google. Just think of it. So in a situation where you still want your users to use their Active Directory credentials, then you could always establish that link with any of these third-party software as a service. So the essence, the reason why it is emphasized that software as a service application is that this is a cloud service that does authentication through the web using web protocols. So you are not using standard network protocols like LDAP or probably Kerberos, which are the protocols that legacy systems would typically require, and legacy systems will be applications that would typically want to run on your local network. And you have several authentication options when you enable hybrid identity. So what are the features of this guy? So the three major authentication options that you have are these, which we'll look at them briefly. You have a password hash. We'll look at password authentication. We'll look at federation. And apart from that, it also offers you these object synchronization. What does that mean? Basically means that all my objects within my on-premise, your object would include your users, it will include your groups and attributes of these entities, and also your devices. It would synchronize them. Synchronize would mean that it would make copies of them available also in the cloud. So if I have a user account on my domain controller, I would see that user account on my Azure AD. If I have a group, I would see it here. If I have a device would also come up here. So it's the Azure AD Connect uses the Azure AD Connect Sync agent to achieve that. Then you're able to also monitor health. Health monitoring primarily just helps you with troubleshooting in situations where where things might not really be working the way you'd expect them to work. Then you could go through the health monitoring logs event within your cloud environment to see exactly what the issue is. Maybe have a user on-prem that is not showing up in the cloud, or probably have a user that is on-prem but some attributes are not popping up in the cloud, or probably strain conflict and stuffs like that, or probably even the sync it's not working. You can always see that. Sorry. So you also have okay what you call Azure AD Cloud Connect before we talk about the authentication options. Now, when Microsoft started out, what you had was Azure AD Sync, which was the protocol or the service or application used for establishing the hybrid identity. Over time, they changed it to Azure AD Connect, which typically just does the same thing with improved functionality like password write back, group write back, device write back, depending on what level of what edition of Azure AD license you are using. Then, but the challenge with Azure AD Connect is that you can only use it for one domain. When I mean one domain, when you set up an Active Directory domain controller, you are typically setting up when you have a fresh environment. If we still remember, I guess we discussed this in the first session last year. If you still remember, uh, in a fresh environment, the hierarchy of legacy Active Directory is that you have a forest, and from a forest you begin to have domains. Typically in an environment where it's just a single organization, you would have one forest, you would have one domain. But you could have where the forest is the topmost boundary. Topmost boundary mean that anything with everything within the organization, every identity object within the organization is domiciled within that forest, even though you could have several domains. But your forest can begin to have several domains. Let's say I have a group of company, and that group of company is called, let's say, adewale.com. When I establish adewale.com, it would serve as a forest, and I'll have an adewale.com domain. If much more later I start up another company that is also a subsidiary of adewale.com, then all I need to do, and I want them to be able to interact in terms of IT infrastructure, that's cross communication, authentication, and resource sharing, then I can come up with another domain. Let's say this is tunde.com. This tunde.com is a domain within the forest. So what this AD sync is saying is that when I'm syncing, I can only sync one domain. I can only sync adewale.com at a time to my cloud tenant. So, but I have limitations to the number of objects. I guess the object should be around 200,000 or less. You can always confirm that. But you now begin to have situations where you have organizations merging, and they are very large in size. Then Microsoft actually came up with the Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync, which primarily some of the features that this comes with is that it would allow you sync multiple domains within a forest. So if I have a forest and I have, say, 30 domains, I can sync them all into my single Azure AD Cloud tenant. Then apart from that, it also offers me availability. Now, one backside with this Azure AD Connect is that I can only have one server. So if you remember, I had said you'd have to install the Azure AD Connect agent or application on a server on your on-prem. It can be your domain controller. It can be just any server. So, but I can't have that in more than one server. Uh, but you should remember that when part of your strategy to setting up a resilient cloud ecosystem, or probably even on-premise ecosystem, is availability. So what typically that means is that if this server goes down for the period of time it's down, I would have some little challenges with my authentication primarily in the cloud. So, but what the additional advantage these guys offers is that you can have it installed on more than one server, so that you'd have that high availability. If this server goes down, the agent of service is running on server 2, and that would still continue. So you can either do Azure AD Connect, and this guy supports a larger number of objects, I guess over 300,000 or over 500,000 objects. So that is Azure AD Connect Cloud Sync and Azure AD Connect. Now, when you have an hybrid environment, then the question comes up, how do I achieve my authentication? First, if you still remember when we talked about the CIA triad, when we talked about the AAA authentication authorization accounting, it always starts with identity, because you have to identify an object before you're able to authenticate that particular object. So the question would always be, where will my identity lie, and who does my authentication? So identity in this case are your object. What identifies your object, either devices or probably users. I myself as a user, I have an identity. Can you still see my screen?
No, I can't see your screen again.
Okay, I think I lost. So let me just reshare a few seconds. Yeah. Okay. How about now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay. So like I was saying, you'd have that challenge of where will my object be, and how do I complete my authentication? Now, if you remember, we said the primary purpose of hybrid is if you have got an existing infrastructure which is on-premise with Active Directory, and you want to move to the cloud, primarily because you want to enjoy cloud services, or you want to move off on-premise and go to the cloud. So you want to begin to ship your objects, your users, your groups, and the likes. You want to begin to ship them to the cloud. So which means, in terms of identity, you'd most likely maintain, I won't call them duplicate copies, but I would say you'd maintain a copy of your identity on both sides. So which means if I have a user on my domain controller, that user would also exist in the cloud, because my Azure AD Sync 2 would do that for me. So my Azure Edit tool will do that for me. But in some cases, you typically have challenges depending on how your applications are set up, or probably how your what are those services you have within your environment, and where the identity actually lies. For instance, where you'd have you create a user in the cloud, you create the user in the cloud, and you don't have those options of write back, where object in the cloud writes back to on-premise. So what that means is that that user will be limited to accessing resources within the cloud. So which means the identity of the user is in the cloud. The user would also typically be doing authentication also against the cloud infrastructure. But the bottom line is that depends so much on you having an understanding of what are your dependencies, what is the architecture, and what do you intend to achieve. So, but having established where your identity would lie, probably in the cloud or on the premise, the second would be how do I authenticate? primarily within the domain, within the local domain, you use your authentication is based on the Kerberos protocol, where user logs in, the identification of that particular user is verified against the domain controller. The domain controller established that that username and password is correct. The user is granted a token. That token will be used within the domain to access resources and the likes. And if it is a cloud, for the cloud, you have a username and password. It is sent to the cloud identity and management service that also verifies your identity and you'll be granted access. But when I now have my hybrid, how does that works? Microsoft had actually provided three options. Number one, you could have the option of password hash synchronization. What does that mean? So I have my user. The assumption is that I'm starting out with an on-premise environment where I have a domain controller, and that domain controller, I've got my users. So, and those users, I've got username and password. I've got password policies that apply. Now, this password is not stored in plain text. It is actually stored in a hashed form using a network NTLM protocol. So which means you can't see it in plain text. So the way the authentication now happens is that if I log on and provide my username and password, that password is hashed. The hashed value of what I provided is matched against the hash value of what exists in the domain controller database. If it matches, it shows that my password is correct and I am allowed to sign in. Now that hash value that is stored on your domain controller is what is now synchronized to the cloud. So it is synchronized to your Azure AD as an attribute on the user object in the cloud. So when you are authenticating from the cloud and you provide your username and password, what the cloud identity management service is also doing is also hashing the password you have provided. Then it will compare it with what you have in the attribute of the identity you have provided. Your identity being maybe your username, your email address, which is matched to a user in the cloud. If it matches, then you are allowed to authenticate. If it does not match, then you'd be thrown a password error. That is what password hash does. Now you have pass-through authentication. For pass-through authentication, the authentication is not done by the cloud uh, identity and access management. That's why it is called pass-through. So the user being the cloud here comes here to provide the username and password. That authentication request is passed down to the domain controller. The domain controller will now check against its own database this password that is coming, and this is done with the help of that Azure AD Connect server that you have installed. Now, the Azure AD server now passes this to the domain controller to say there's an authentication request. Can you confirm if this username and password is correct? If it is correct, the domain controller confirms it is correct, and that is sent back to the cloud. Then the cloud grants the user access. Now, if you remember, what I said was one of the major disadvantages of not a disadvantage, but a feature that does not exist of Azure AD Connect, if we still remember, compared to what I just said about pass-through authentication. Can anybody give us an idea of what could possibly be a major concern with using pass-through authentication? Anybody? If you are setting up an hybrid and you have pass-through authentication, what would be the most common challenge you'd typically have? Any idea? Nobody? So we want to try.
Sorry, sir. I just want to confirm it. The question is when setting up an hybrid environment, what password authentication we won't have? Is that the question?
No, no, that's not the question. I'd explained what password hash does and pass-through authentication. So I'm saying linking this up to an understanding of how Azure AD Connect works, and you now using the pass-through authentication, what could be a common challenge you would have when you use pass-through authentication as the system of authentication within your hybrid environment?
Could it be synchronization issue?
Not necessarily. So let me up.
Yes.
We said if you use Azure AD Connect, I hope you can still see my screen.
Yes, we can.
So if you use Azure AD Connect, I'd said one challenge is that you can only use one machine. You can't have the agent installed on multiple machines for high availability. That's one point. The second point for pass-through authentication is that when you use pass-through authentication is not done directly by the cloud agent. Instead, your authentication request is sent through to the machine that runs your Azure AD Connect agent and completed by the domain controller. Then domain controller sends back that particular request. That's why it is called pass-through. That means, your request, I'll pass it through to your primary identity provider, which is the on-premise domain controller. So the challenge here now is that when this guy goes down, users trying to authenticating or that are trying to authenticate to the cloud begin to have authentication issues, because the guy who is meant to pass through that request to the domain controller is down. And even if your domain controller is down also, although you could argue that by architecture a domain controller is meant to be highly available, so you could have more than one domain controller. But you won't typically have such issues if you use password hash synchronization, because that password hash is already stored in the cloud as an attribute on the user's profile. That is why even when your domain controller is down, your Azure AD agent is down, users who are synced to the cloud will still continue to be able to log into the cloud, at least for a period of time. Even when their password has expired, they will still continue to be able to log into the cloud, which gives you that leverage over challenges you may have when using pass-through authentication. Then yes, we have the Active Directory Federation services. Active Directory Federation services is actually an old technology which still exists, and it kind of works like what you'd expect within the pass-through, but not directly the same. So what Federation service does is allow you to rely on the authentication completed by a different identity provider and still consume it, using what we refer to as claim-based authentication. Claim-based means that your domain controller claims this is who you are and you have been authenticated. Then I would say I trust your domain controller, so I can go ahead and authenticate you. And you typically set this up when you have the Active Directory Federation service installed. So you are just federating two different identity provider, on-premise, Active Directory, and cloud. But this could also typically work for any other type of setup, even when it is not an Azure cloud. Think of it. Let's say I have Facebook today. I want users to be able to log in with Facebook. Facebook offers claim-based authentication. All I just need to do is to set up a domain controller, install my ADFS, share metadata across both ends. So users would continue to log in with their AD account to Facebook. So they don't have to maintain a username and password on Facebook. Just similarly, the way you would typically see applications that would say login with Facebook, login with Google, and you don't have to maintain a username and password on that other application. That is how that works. So we've seen password hash synchronization. Your password is synchronized to Active Directory, and you sign into Active Directory using the on-premise password. And you can see this would improve productivity of your users and reduce cost to help desk, because users wouldn't have to be calling all the time to say, I've got issues with my password. They wouldn't have to maintain two different passwords, one for the cloud and one for on-premise. While for the pass-through authentication, the request still has to be sent through to the pass-through agent, which runs on your Azure AD Connect, and the authentication would be verified by your on-premise domain controller. So when this link is broken, then users would have challenges connecting. And for the federation, like I said, you must have gotten a trust established between both identity systems, that is your on-premise and also your cloud. They would have shared metadata to establish that particular trust, and you could sign in from. So the way the signing works is that if I go into my on-premise, to my cloud, to say my username and password is, let's say, A, what this would do is that this guy would contact the domain controller to say, I have a user. The user has claimed that he is A and his password is this. Do you know the user? Yes, I know the user. Is his account active? Yes, the account is active. Should I grant him access? Yes, grant him access. Then this guy now returns to grant the guy access here. So which means on this part, the users does not need to maintain another username and password for the on-premise. The cloud-based solution will typically just consume the authentication that is done by the on-premise infrastructure. So now, you'd typically have to go through a lot of design and architectural analysis to determine exactly which of these options would work, and any of them can work depending on your situation and also depending on what you intend to achieve. So this is just a decision tree that can help. If you do you want to handle, if you want Azure AD to handle your request completely, that is if you have a cloud-only environment. If that is yes, then the question will be, do you want to enforce user-level Active Directory security policies during signing? What are the user-level Active Directory security policies? Password history, password strength. If you remember on your domain controller, you typically have this as a policy, and you still want that to apply. Then in this particular case, if you want this, then the best bet is for you is to have an hybrid environment. Then yes, do you have sign-in requirements not natively supported by Azure AD? If you have that, then you either do a federation or probably do a password hash sync. In this particular case, do you want sign-in disaster recovery or probably leak credential report? So you can see sign-in disaster recovery and some of these leak credential stuffs are features of the cloud, and that's what we'll talk about next. Where we'll talk about identity protection. I want to begin to see that the password you are using, is it a password that is already in the wild that people know that it has been cracked, or probably do you have any kind of behavioral activity that may suggest that you're under risk, or probably that your credential may have been compromised? These features are not available within on-premise, and if you want such features, then you typically want to do an hybrid, either as a pass-through or probably pass-through with a password hash. You can combine both of them. So that's by and large of what this decision tree would do. So what the expert would do here is see how you'd typically set up an hybrid environment. Let me see if I have a domain controller here that we could use. Let's see, orange. So do you have any questions so far before this guy comes up? You can as well drop your questions in the chat if there is any. The administrator account becomes the main domain when you create the new domain cannot be created because local password does not meet the requirement. Okay. So what I'm doing here is to set up a domain controller, which would come back briefly to install the Azure AD Connect on, and would see how that gives us an hybrid setup. Okay. So while that is running, let me promote this guy to a domain controller. Okay. So would come back to complete that hybrid setup once the domain controller is ready. So what would try to do in this situation comes, yeah, what requirement currently local administrator password is blank, local admin is blank, local admin can be blank, administrator set password. Okay. So now let's talk about identity protection. Now, one of the major challenges of security within any system, it's actually the challenge of identity and authentication. Reason being that over time, most IT system would typically rely on the most common method of authentication, which is you providing a username, which is your identity, and a password, which is what you use for authentication. But we can imagine how insecure and weak this system of authentication is. And what do I mean? If today I know your username, I am 50% done with compromising your system, because all I need to do is to begin to try to guess your password. And if you now couple this with the fact that people would typically not like to use password, even though you would always have this password policy enforcement to say your password must be this long, must be this difficult. We are all human beings, and we wouldn't want like to abide by that, because we would always argue that it's causing so much discomfort trying to remember that long password and stuff like that. And that also makes it very weak for compromise. And also, one of the most successful method of authentication is social engineering. And social engineering is not just about meeting people to try to psychologically get them to divulge their information. When you begin to be attacked using phishing, spamming, using malicious links, uh, people selling things or probably sending you things that would look attractive so that you can provide your credentials, those are still social engineering, and they are password attacks. Now, when you put all this into consideration, you'd realize that heavily depending on just username and password for authentication, it's not the best, and it is one of the weakest link within your security. So what Microsoft has done is to look at what are the other ways by which you could increase the strength of your authentication or the strength of your security by offering additional layer of protection around your authentication system. So they came up with a number of features under identity protection. So we look at identity protection, risk event, user risks, different types of risk policies. Then now we'll talk about multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and we look at access review. So identity protection primarily comes with three major features, which is you having more than one form of authentication, which is multi-factor authentication. Then also you are monitoring uh, the user behavior and also user sign-in behavior. User behavior and user sign-in behavior. Because a large number of time, uh, every day, you could imagine every day when you get to work or probably you need to use any application, your mode of usage will typically be the same for a significant period of time. Probably I need to sign into my Facebook, get my phone, launch the app, provide my username and password if it prompts, and I continue to use. When an attacker is trying to compromise that system, a number of unusual behavior will be exhibited by that attacker to be able to get access to your system. And those behaviors or perhaps those activities are indicator of compromise. So which means they are meant to flag off your curiosity to say, would are they typically use this system and try to sign it this way? Could something be wrong? So using some analytics and machine learning engine, Microsoft is able to come up with these features that would monitor some of these activities and begin to prompt you to say, there's likelihood that something is wrong with the way this guy is authenticating. It could have been compromised. Take this action. And that is the idea behind the identity protection. So it's automated detection and remediation of identity-based risks. So those indication of compromise are what they refer to as identity-based risks. And you can investigate these risks using data, because some of those data that are correlated to begin to give you that prompt, they are made available for you within the portal so that you can carry out your own investigation and begin to determine to say, is this an issue? So let's give an instance. Was it last year, some maybe last year or probably the year before, when the government of Nigeria placed a restriction on Twitter? A large number of us went online and began to sign up for VPN. And when we sign up for VPN, most of us do this on our mobile phones or even our workplace devices. And we go back to our corporate network while working we still want to see what's the latest gist on Twitter. We want to get our phone and jump on Twitter. We want to get our system and log into Twitter, and we have that VPN. And typically, how does this restriction? I guess we talked about this also during the first session last year. How is this restriction placed? Primarily, the most common mode of placing this restriction is using the unique identity used across a network, which is IP addresses. And the IP addresses are located regionally. So you would typically know what IP address is registered in Nigeria, or block of IP address that is registered in Nigeria and the likes. So what the government would just say is tell all the service provider to say block the address of Twitter. When they block the address of Twitter, it's not Twitter blocking us. We are the one blocking Twitter. So since you'll be using all your service providers here in Nigeria and they have their IP addresses block registered within the same region, when you are in Nigeria using any of those service providers, you are not allowed to access Twitter. Then how does VPN help you out? VPN would give you the IP address of a different service provider that is not in Nigeria. Then you are able to get through and access. So it will assume that you are accessing Twitter from whatever region the IP address is coming from. Maybe you have a US IP address, you have a Chinese IP address, or probably London IP address. Since London, China, US are not restricting Twitter across their own internet backbone, then you won't have issues. So that's the idea. Now, what that constituted was that for organizations that use some of these advanced identity protection systems, it begins to flag off risks, because what that means is that as of last week, Tunde was in Nigeria. He logged into the system. His IP address is flagged as in Nigeria. He got into the office this morning. The same thing, his IP address, and within just 10 minutes, it shows that Tunde is logging in from China. How could that happen? It's not possible. It's an unusual behavior. So Tunde's access or activity on the network will be flagged as a risk, which would more or less like you have a travel. It's not possible for you to travel between here to China in 10 seconds or probably in 10 minutes. That is a risk. And when you are logged in China, in the next few seconds, it is showing again that now you are in California, because you are using a VPN client that randomly picks up any available IP address to grant you access. So users begins to have a lot of authentication issues, because that is typically one of the common ways that if an attacker who is not domiciled in Nigeria is targeting you and he needs to use those credentials captured, he will typically use it from his own region, which is not possible for you to be in at any point in time to authenticate. So the system will flag it as a risk. And these are some of those things this would do. So you have multi-factor authentication, which I believe everybody would know about. That is you providing more than one form of authentication just to still verify that you are truly who you claimed you are. So if I have my identity is my username, my password is one form of authentication, which is what I have. I am expected to always have my password or probably know my password. But if an attacker, my identity might not be something that is protected. Your identity is maybe your username, or probably your email address, or if you have maybe employee ID or whatever it is, just that thing that uniquely identifies you. That is your identity. Then your password is what you use to verify that, yes, because I may know your username, I may know your email address. If you once sent me an email, then I want to use that to log into your system. How do I verify to the system that I truly own that username? Then I have to supply the password, which is what I expect only the user of the email address should have. But if I've gotten that email address from you, that password from you, or probably I've watched you as you type that password on your system, now I know it. I can post to be you and log into that particular system. Then it becomes compromised. So the question will now be that, what about if it is possible that I ask for more than one information to verify who you are? That is where the multi-factor authentication comes in. So I've asked for password, okay, let me ask for one more thing. This is what you know, which anybody else can know, the password. About if I ask for something that is unique to you and you are meant to have, so which means it identifies you as a unique thing which someone else would typically not have or they can't get from you. That is when you begin to look at biometric systems to say, okay, what about your fingerprint? What about your iris scan or facial recognition? So provide that to me so I can use that to match what I have on the system to know if you are the one. So that additional information is the second factor. When you now combine it, that gives you a multi-factor system of authentication. So within the cloud, Microsoft has actually produced several other options of authentication which you can use in addition to your password. You could use your biometric and facial for devices because that won't typically work on applications except when you have set it up to do single sign-on, such that once you are signed onto your device, that sign-on also applies to any application you have across the browser. It could be providing you a unique code which you are meant to provide through any channel. It could be SMS, it could be phone call, it could be an app. That is multi-factor authentication. Then I'd also talked about the user sign-in risks, user risks, and sign-in risks. So, what are those types of events or probably attacks or risks that identity protection would always help you mitigate against? Leaked credential. We said that someone stealing your password, signing in from anonymous password, IP addresses, or probably impossible time travel. So it's not possible for me to travel from Lagos to Jamaica in 10 seconds. So if I've logged into my cloud platform today with an IP address that is Nigeria, then I do VPN to give me an IP address that is Jamaica. It's not possible within that 10 seconds for me to travel across both locations. So it's going to flag that as a risk. Or probably an IP address that is not registered, that is not used, which is one of the most common type of IP address attackers will typically use. You try to, because an IP address is meant to register to an identity. You begin to try to investigate who is using this IP address. You can't really see it tied to any location or probably any entity. So the platform, that's the cloud platform, would have a list. Over time. They update the platform with lists of some of these compromised IP addresses. So when it sees that access to your system is being done across any of these malicious IP addresses, it flags it on familiar locations. Over time, you'll be logging in from a particular mobile device. In the last 10 years, your authentication is from this mobile device. Today, you change your mobile device. It's saying a new mobile device. It will flag it as a risk. Sign in from infected devices, and also sign in from IP addresses with suspicious activities. And if you remember, when we're talking about the zero trust architecture, one of the components of zero trust architecture is number one, you having a strong authentication and also ensuring continuous compliance, because you are not just trusting. So for instance, an infected device, yes, I see that this device is my device, is registered to my Active Directory local domain, or it is registered to my cloud domain. So within the legacy and system, I'm just meant to trust it to say, oh, since this is my device and it's logged into authentication through the domain, it is trusted. But it is saying, yeah, I can see you are my device, but your current status is not trustworthy. So I would flag it. This is enforcing that zero trust, which means do not trust any system. So do not trust my username and password for authentication. Check, am I logging in from the usual place I should log in? If I'm not sure, that is if the system is doubting that this location is not familiar, no, I have to do something now. I don't just trust it that, yes, this is, are they logging in from that particular platform? So these are some of those risks that identity protection would help you mitigate. So you'd typically set this up by defining identity policy protection policies. You'd have an MFA policy, user risk policy. You also have sign-in risk policies. You would see, and what does the policy do? Within the policy, you first of all identify first, what is your risk appetite, because the risks are graded from low, medium to high. So that means a number of activities that may be suspected, or probably number of behaviors that may be suspected around a user sign-in or probably user profile may be low. Then you may say, yeah, this is expected, and it doesn't really mean that the user may be compromised. So it is low. Medium, this is way more than medium. Should I accept it like a normal behavior? Because it is expected that you are false positive in some situations. Should I accept it as a normal behavior? So if I'm accepting these two as a normal behavior, or probably that may constitute false positive, I may say do nothing about it if you flag this. But when it is I, which is something very unusual, then I'll now carry out certain actions or probably conditions to say, okay, if a profile is flagged to be of high risk, or probably if a signing attempt is flagged to be of high risk, do this. What are those things you could do? You can either allow access with a condition, or you block access. For instance, you could say allow access, but prompt the user for a second factor authentication, or probably allow access, but prompt the user for immediate password change, which are things that because if truly the user has been compromised, and that's the reason why the user's profile or probably signing attempt is flagged as an high risk, then what will be your response? What will be your remediation attempt? Yeah, first thing is you want to force users to change their password, so that when they change their password, so even if that account has been compromised, every active session of that attacker, probably intruder, gets expired and the intruder is knocked off. Or probably if you say enforce multi-factor authentication, every access token is refreshed, and every attempt to re-access any of those applications, maybe your Outlook or probably your web or whatever application you're trying to access, would force for an authentication request, which you wouldn't expect the attacker to have. Then we have the MFA. Here we look at the number of MFA settings and how the whole of these ties up together. So a few seconds, I guess this guy is back. Run through this okay, my password is this. Do I still remember? Okay. So first, let's look at setting up an hybrid. Then we'll look at defining identity protection. This is a domain controller, although it's empty. I don't have users in there. I have just the default user. So I'll go ahead and create one or two additional user. I'll call this and this is going to be the domain. This is, let me call this flex. So now coding. Okay, so this is done. So like I said, what you'd use to set up your hybrid, it can either be Azure AD Connect or probably Azure AD Cloud Sync. I think I have one of them already downloaded somewhere here. Okay, so I have the Azure AD Connect. Did the download complete? A few seconds. Let me see. MSI. So let's just go and download this. I'll say Azure AD. Like I said, it's not a condition that you install the Azure AD Connect on your domain controller. It could be on any other server apart from your domain controller. But in a situation where you don't have maybe enough infrastructure, then you may go ahead and just place it on the domain controller. So while that is installing, let's come to our Azure portal and see what are the identity protection we have. So I'll come to portal. Okay. So this is my Azure tenant. I would go to Azure Active Directory. And for a number, if we remember when we're talking about the editions of Azure Active Directory, you have the free, you have the Azure Active Directory for Microsoft 365 apps, you have the premium P1, you have the premium P2. And we said for some of these identity protection features, you typically need a premium license, that P1 or probably P2. So yeah, I have an Azure P2 license, which would allow us go for identity protection. So I would come in here and I'll come to identity protection. So here I have all the features, configurations, and settings that constitute the identity protection service or probably feature. Start is looking at my policies, define what I'll be looking at and what is that acceptable threshold for a user profile risk, a sign-in risk, or probably what would be my multi-factor authentication policy. Then we would go ahead to see what are those identities that have been flagged as risky, probably be users or probably workload or probably signing, and would also look at users. So the essence of this is even continuous monitoring. I've seen environments where typically these are just left that way, and some of those rich information that would give you an idea of if you are typically under attack, or probably what are those unusual behaviors of your users that may constitute risks. You don't get to know about them because you are not watching that space. You are not getting those informations. So first looking at users sign-in risks. First, to define this, you have just three options. Your assignment, who should this apply to? It's granular that you want some people to be covered under this protection, and you may choose not to have some people covered inside that. We'll look at situations where you may typically have that. Then also, what is your risk threshold? So from here, I would the default is all users, so which means I want this policy to apply to all my users, or I want selected users. If I need to exclude, I may apply to all users, but come here to exclude a few. Then here I'll define what will be my risk threshold. Configure user risk level needed for this policy to be enforced. I want this to apply even if the risk of the user is low. So which means we apply for when the user is low, medium, and above. If I choose medium, it's going to be medium and above. And if I choose high, it means that only profiles that have been flagged as a high risky profile should get this policy. And what would be the action to say, okay, when a user is now flagged as an high risk user, what should the cloud identity management system do? So you have the option of, say, block access. So this user appears to be very risky, or probably a lot of behavioral activities have been flagged to suggest that that account has been compromised. Then the next thing I want to do is block access. And what would that do? That would be an incident response to the attacker's attempt, because as at that time, anything the attacker is trying to access will be restricted because access to it has been blocked. That user will not be able to actual user would not be able to use the account, and the intruder also would not be able to use the account. Or you could say allow access but force a password change. So which means users or the attacker's current session would be timed out and a password change would be enforced. So I could say, yeah, this is what I want. Then here, currently it's disabled, I'll say enabled. Now, anybody with an idea of any situation where you would typically want to exclude a user from such policy? Any idea? Anyone?
Good morning. Please, can you
Yeah, good
repeat the
morning.
question?
Yeah, I say any idea of a situation where you would want to exempt users from such policies. That means you don't want them to be protected against any identity compromise.
Got you.
So let me help us. If I do this, all users, okay, so maybe I should just talk about this. I don't want to enable this. Let me just leave it. Then I'll come back to talk about that. So the difference between this is here within the user risks is that the user's profile is what is being flagged as risky because of a number of things or probably activities or data that has been collected and analyzed to suggest that something may be wrong with this profile. Why for this? It is the current signing or probably previous signing activities of that user's behavior, signing behavior of the user that would suggest. For instance, one of the activities that may be flagged here is multiple authentication attempts for the user profile. Multiple authentication attempts. Signing risk here is maybe the user is just signing across two different locations within the shortest period of time. Then you say, no, this attempt is actually risky. So for this also, you may want to apply it to users. What is your risk appetite and what should happen? Here also you can see allow password or probably, block access or allow access and require multi-factor authentication. Now, if you do this and apply it to all your users, including your administrators, that would mean that even as an administrator, when this happens, you would be impacted. But now, if you are the only administrator within that environment, and your profile has been flagged as risky, your sign-in has been flagged as risky, and you are now faced with a number of eventualities that wouldn't allow you access that platform again. Maybe because you have MFA, you are not with your MFA phone, you are not getting the code. What that means is that you are completely logged out. Even despite the fact that Microsoft will typically say that have this enabled, they will tell you that you should offer exclusion for jailbreak. What that means is that think of that day where the global administrator would typically be totally locked out, and some of those remediation activity, either change password or probably force MFA, would not be possible for the global administrator. It means that the global administrator would not be able to access that particular tenant. So it's always good that you have one, maybe credentials that is not being used. That would just be a credential somewhere with a very strong authentication policy that is not being used. You'd keep it somewhere and you exclude it in case of that emergency. While for authentication, here we know what multi-factor authentication is. You want to enforce all your users to register and begin to use multi-factor authentication. So this is where you define the policies. Why here would be where you begin to see, although this is empty because this is a new tenant, this is where you begin to see users that have been flagged as risky. So the expectation is that you'd get this as a report, weekly digest, or probably everyday notification where you'd go ahead and investigate the reason why this user has been flagged as risky, the reason why a particular workload identity has been flagged as risky. That is, workload identity would begin to, well, you remember what we talked about manage identity. The reason why a user's sign-in will be flagged as risky. So you are meant to investigate, and when you investigate to further help this platform itself, it is expected that you come here to confirm if that account was truly compromised after investigation, or maybe it is just a false positive. Number one, this helps you to maintain a clean monitoring environment, and also it also helps the engine and the back-end engine which does this to better help you identify risks in actual set. So it is not an environment that we should just set up and ignore. So that's for identity protection. Any question? So this is done, and let's come here to say, let's run this. So this is installing the Microsoft Azure AD Connect, which would help establish an hybrid identity within my on-premise identity management system, which is Active Directory. I have this domain controller and my cloud platform. So this is going to ask for a global admin credential within my cloud. Let me get one. I'm going to provide a local admin, global admin. I'll provide a global admin password. I'll go next. I hate this stuff. This JavaScript stuff and servers can be a nightmare. A few seconds, let me see if is my Internet Explorer. Turn this guy off. Okay. Go next. Okay. So I have to sign in to this. Write my credentials. So now, due to the fact that I'm a global admin on that tenant, by signing into this, it knows what tenant I am establishing that connect with. Okay, so I have MFA on this guy. I would complete that MFA challenge. Okay, so here it's asking for the enterprise administrator for my domain. So I would quickly get that from here. So I'll get this here. That is the, and the password.
Hello, Wale.
Yes, I can hear you.
So I don't know if I'm the only one.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing on the screen is just your presentation.
Ooh. Okay, sorry. Let me. Oh. So that means few seconds. Waste. I hope you can see this now, right? What can you see now?
We can see your screen now.
Okay, with the VM, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. Sorry for that, I didn't note. So just to recap what I've done, what I typically just did was download the Azure AD Connect agent. I have this domain controller, this server that has been installed with the domain controller. The name of the local domain is arigelocal.com. It's a new environment, and I only added just one user. Every other object here are the default users that you typically have with a new or fresh domain controller setup. And within my domain, so let me, I guess it should be, let me see if I portal azure.com, this network ish. Okay, I'll fix this later. So let me bring this up here and just show the domain. Can you see the browser I'm sharing on the screen? That shows my tenant. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
So
Thank you.
what can you see on the screen now?
Okay, Microsoft overview, Visual Active Directory.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so
yeah, that's great. Okay, so the name of my domain is this. That is my cloud domain, and I have Active Directory Premium. So this is the domain that I'm currently signed in, and here you see Azure AD Connect. It would just be empty now because currently I don't have any sync ongoing, so it's just going to be empty until when I complete that configuration. So when I complete that configuration, then I would come here. This is where I would be able to see my active AD Connect with my on-premise. What is the method of password hash that I've chosen, or probably method of authentication? When was the last time the sync ran, and what is the domain that is currently being synced? So I'll see that here. So I'll drop this here while I continue with this setup. So in here, just so that we see, the first thing I've done, this is just a setting, use express setting. I've provided the local admin, global admin rather, for my cloud tenant, and provided the credential. It's just going to connect and ask me to validate that I'm signing in. Then the next, it would require that I provide the domain administrator credentials for my on-premise. So I've provided the root credential for your cloud is your global admin. The root credential for your on-premise is your enterprise admin. So you can see, although there's domain admin, but enterprise admin is actually the root credential within your domain, because enterprise admin offers you access to the forest. So I'll provide my enterprise admin credentials in here. Where's that guy? This is it. Then I'll go next. So yeah, this guy is saying he's not a member of the enterprise. So let me see. That means it's not this guy. It is administrator, though I'm logged in with this guy. Yep. So it says to use your this, you have to provide a suffix here, and this guy, to use this blah, 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 UPN surface to match one of the verified domain. Okay. This is another challenge. Can I solve this now? Let me see. Let me see if it won't require me. So the requirement in here is that so let's just read it. So it says to use the on-premise credentials for Azure AD, UPN suffixes to match one of the verified custom domains in Azure AD. So the following table lists the UPN suffixes defined in my on-premise environment along with the matching domain in Azure. So currently within my on-premise, I have this particular domain. In the cloud, I have only the default Microsoft domain, which is where's that browser? Sorry. Yeah. So in the cloud, I still have my default .onmicrosoft.com domain. And for me to add a custom domain, I doubt if I'll be able to add that now because it would require me to do a number of verifications. Let me see. And I have to begin to log into my that's it. I have to begin to log into my DNS provider domain and add. Let's see if I can fool this guy. It says it's available. Okay, unavailable. Okay. See. Okay, it's not added. Do I have any seconds? Let's say verify. So let's quickly verify this guy in few seconds. So I remember we talked about verifying domains in the first class there. So the idea behind verifying domain is that Microsoft just wants to know, number one, for you to use this additional functionality, you shouldn't be running on the default Microsoft domain, which is the .onmicrosoft.com. That's number one. Number two, for you to verify, it needs to know that truly you own that particular domain so that you are not just setting up a cloud identity with the domain of another organization, like you trying to hijack their domain in the cloud. So you'd have to show that you own that particular domain. And one way to do that is you should have access to the DNS entries of that domain because you'd be required to provide this information and create an entry. So I would do that in few seconds and probably show us how that is being done. Okay. So this is my DNS registrar, and I have this domain I intend to use. So the requirement here is that I either add a TXT record or probably I had an MX record. So I would come here to say I would go ahead and add a TXT record. The host here would be the @. The value here is the value I have here. The time to leave is how long it takes for this to refresh, but I don't have much time. Even this 5 minutes is too much for me. Can I have 1 minute? Yes, I would say in 1 minute, so that this propagates in the shortest period of time, and I can come here. Once I do this, all I need to do is come here and say verify, and let's see if this would propagate in a minute. Still not yet. Go, 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 go. Okay, so you can see, have this guy used somewhere else before. So I have this domain tied to a different domain before. So let me quickly see if I have another domain I could use. Domain. So I'll come back here and try to use a different domain. So I'll say add this guy, add this, and go add this record. I'll do just the same thing like I did earlier. I'll add a txt record. Add sign values this. I would hope I've not used this before. So let's. So while that is trying to propagate, one more thing I need to do, since I'll be adding a custom domain, is I need to add a UPN, that is a user principal name suffix, that would match that domain that I have in the cloud. Although it's not important, but depends on which domain parameter basically I would be using to authenticate. I would explain that. What is it? In my domain, there is that. Few seconds. From here. Okay, let's verify this. Whoop. So all my domains are currently tied to one tenant on the other. So I won't be able to continue with this because it requires that I have that domain. But primarily, what would you be doing? Okay, let's see. Yeah, this gives us the option to continue. That makes sense. So because this is exactly what we want. So this is going to install a lightweight SQL database on the machine on which you are installing it, and on that SQL database you have a number of metadata and information stored in there. And by the time you can see synchronization service is running, by the time this is done, the users that I have on my domain controller would now be available for me in the cloud, and I can begin to apply those identity protection features on those users, and I can from here define what is my authentication method that I want. Do I want password hash sync, or probably do I want pass through? So this would take some minutes to complete, then we'll come back to it once it's done. So let's go back to this slide. So I'd said what MFA is, though there are a number of configurations and settings that you can define within your MFA, but we know what MFA is used for. So let's go back to the tenant and see what our MFA settings and options are. So here, first you have the account lockout. The idea behind account lockout is when you provide incorrect credentials a number of times, what will be the minimum number of attempts that you would expect users to make to sign in before you automatically log the account. Now, the temporary lock in the multi-factor authentication service if there are too many denied authentication attempts in a row. So I can say the number of minimum of multi-factor authentication denied that I want, maybe 2 or 3. Now, you'd say, is it possible that MFA denial is done? Yeah, let's look at an instance where I wanted to authenticate and I waited for the code. Eventually, when the code came in, the code might have been expired because each of those codes would have the period of time for which you use it. Then you now provide it when it is already expired. That is actually a failed attempt, and it will begin to count it. And you can now try to see how important this is if an attacker has done something on your phone such that codes that are generated still get to them, and but before it gets to them, it has expired. They will continue to try and try and try and try and try until they get the right one. But this is saying that when you try too many times, I want to believe your account is being compromised. So this is also a protection against your MFA level of security. So you can specify for how long the account should be locked out or not. Then so users may also have been blocked. A blocked user would not receive authentication requests. You can come here to unblock them. Here you can see notifications around fraud alerts, and you would want to specify if you want users to be able to signify fraud alert. There are a number of attack against authentication system, multi-factor authentication system these days. You may want to read about that. Then here you have additional focus settings, the ID number if you want to restrict this to a particular number that will be calling your phones. Then there used to be multi-factor authentication server for on-premise infrastructure, even though it still integrates with your cloud, but it is being deprecated now from 2019. You can't use multi-factor authentication server again. So, but then when it was still in use, you would always have that in there. Then apart from that, you also have an additional place where you can manage MFA
Sorry,
for users.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
yeah, go
Why
ahead,
was
please.
it why was it deprecated?
So Microsoft wants to concentrate the use of multi-factor authentication to the cloud only, the management of multi-factor authentication to the cloud. So initially, what the server would do is allow you use MFA within your on-premise infrastructure. But now, if you have an hybrid system, you can still use it without having the server. So having that duplicated technology that would serve the same purpose wasn't necessary because you'll be spending time, money, and resource to maintain the multi-factor authentication server application, and also the same time, resources, and money to also maintain the one you have in the cloud. So they took that off. So let's
Thank
also
you.
come. Yeah, you're welcome. If you come to users here, you can also see per user MFA. This is where you can go and enable and disable MFA per individual user profile. And the way you set up MFA is, okay, we'll come back to that. Yeah, so these are the users, dummy users I have in here. And you can see for them, MFA is actually disabled, but you have 3 options here. You can either enable, you can disable, or you can enforce. So if I come here to say enable multi-factor authentication, what this would mean is that even if this user has not signed up for MFA before now, when the user is trying to log in, because I have enabled MFA on the user's profile, the user will be forced. I think I just lost my screen now. Let me reshare. So the user would be forced to provide the MFA authentication at their next login if you do this. But apart from doing this, because typically you wouldn't want to come here and begin to enable MFA on users profile one after the other, you could set up an MFA policy. Let's come to, I guess we could see that from identity protection in here. MFA policy here where you say require Azure multi-factor authentication registration. So if a user, if you enable this and you enforce it on users, you don't need to come here to enable or disable again, because this would force users to register for MFA and enable it on their profile. So let's see if, okay, this guy is done. Let me come back to the domain controller. Yeah, okay. Okay. So this guy is done running, and so it says configuration is complete. Then I have say exit. Now, if I come to my portal now, I would see, you know, when setting that up, what I used was to use express and settings. Express and settings means use the default. I didn't have to customize. So we'll go back to where we can edit and see some of those stuffs we had talked about. So if I come back to my Azure Active Directory in here, and I come to Azure AD Connect, here, if I come to Connect Sync, so this is saying this hasn't synced before, and that is because a sync would not happen until I close that dialog box. So let me come in here and run through this. So first, let me come. As already connect. I'll say yes. So yeah, I want to see what are those configurations options I have, and apart from the default that I'd asked the wizard to use when running. So you can see each time you launch this dialog box, synchronization would be disabled or probably be suspended. So you may want to take note of that. So here, where I have a number of my configurations are actually here. Customize synchronization options. When you are doing device write back and when you want to set up Windows Hello for business for your devices, that is for your endpoint, you deal with configurations within this particular place. When you want to change the user with which you sign in, you can always do this. Then also when you are dealing with federation. So let's look at the configuration options first. I still have my password in there. Yes. So you go. Says wrong password. Let me see. Okay, let me complete this and say approve. Go. Okay, so the options you have in here includes you deciding on. First, let me see why. Just give me a few seconds. Let me see why this DNS is not going through. Okay, I thought as much. Few seconds, please. 8.8.8.8. This will resolve this. So, yep. So here I have, we can see the forest. This is my Active Directory forest, which I am syncing with the cloud. Then if I go next, so here, because a number of times you may not necessarily, especially when you have a very large on-premise infrastructure, you have a very large on-premise infrastructure with a lot of users. You may not want all those users to be synced to the cloud. Let's say I have I have 1,000 users within my environment, and I am moving to the cloud, but I want to do this in phases. I'd only signed up for, let's say, 10 user license, Azure AD Premium user license in the cloud. I'd only signed up for 10. So I want to ensure that I sync only just 10 users. 2 seconds, please. So I want to be sure that I'm seeking only 10 users. This allows me to select specifically what object or probably what OUs. If you match this with this, my OUs are my containers. Currently, this is selecting everything, which is not best practice, because what this is going to do is sync everything I have within my on-premise, my domain controllers, my computers, my servers, and the rest of them like that. So I may say, no, I don't want that. I only want to sync my users. So I can specify that here and go next. So here is where I now have my additional configuration. Here I said, okay, do password hash synchronization. By enabling this, it means that I want the hash of the password of each of those users to be moved to the cloud. If I want password right back, yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, Reggie, pardon me, please. Your
Yeah.
screen on my end is pretty small. Is it possible to make it full screen?
Let's see. I guess it's the resolution. Let's see. Let me minimize this. Is it any better now?
Nope. On my end, no.
Let's see.
So I think that resolution just working in your VM. I don't know if anybody else can confirm if they are also seeing.
Are you able to see
or rather,
the? What about now?
for my end, it's still pretty tiny.
Like,
I mean, like
tiny,
it's just
right?
occupying. Yeah, it's occupying less than 1/4 of the screen.
Screen. Okay.
I don't know if I'm the only one experiencing this though.
Let's see. Is there anyone else expressing the same thing? Hello?
Yes, what's that? Hello?
Yeah. The screen, the resolution, are you able to see what I have on the screen? Or it's tiny?
It's quite small.
Very tiny now.
It's very small.
I see. So I think, let me see the VM. That may possibly be the VM. Let's see. Let me see if I can limit it to a particular. Where's the display? Yeah. See. Is it any better? Hello, is it better?
No,
No, it's still the same.
no.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me see if I could use another approach, but I think it's because of the resolution of the system. So just a few seconds. Let's see if this works. I would just RDP into that guy. Allow. This is 192. Okay. I think it's even better now. How about now? Is it better?
Yes. It is.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
What did you do?
It's the resolution of my second screen. It's running on over 1080.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. So we were here. So I said password write back, which is also one of the reasons why most organizations will typically go and do cloud. Now, you can imagine, I don't know, for a number of us during the lockdown, one of the major challenges experienced by most organizations is the challenge with password expiry, password reset for on-premise infrastructures. So you have devices joined to the domain, users profile that are maintained on local Active Directory. You're out of the office of for let's say almost let's say a 2-3 months. Your password is now expired. For you to typically change your password, you need to be on the network. And even if your password is changed for you on your behalf, your system is joined to the local domain. That system needs to be on that local domain to be able to update that password. What password write-back does is that it allows users to be able to even change their own password themselves from the cloud, which now gets synced back to the domain controller through this AD sync. So you can now have password self-service where users can change their password themselves without having to call the help desk. So you can enable that here if you want. For device write back is a situation where you have your device joined to Azure AD, but you want that device to also have an identity within your local domain controller. You can also enable this if you want, as well as a group write back. So those are the options that you have in there, which if you set them up, it defines how your synchronization works. So I would just go ahead and say configure, and this would go ahead to complete the whole configuration process. And in few minutes or thereabout, I would have that information showing within my on-premise, my cloud domain. So let's look out for that user that we have on the on-premise infrastructure if that user is now available in the cloud. So I think let's see, we can pause here, and once this is done, we'll continue from here next class where we talk about conditional access. So any questions while this is running? Any question?
Yeah, so Roddy,
Yeah.
I joined late. I'm just
Okay.
wondering if the recording will be made available, please.
Yeah, sure, it will. Would share it after the session.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this guy is done. So let's see, and my internet. So also one thing that needs to that you have to put in consideration is that whatever server on which you are running your Azure AD Connect should have internet service on it. And that may be the reason why some people may not want to run it on the domain controller, because there are security practices that suggest that you shouldn't have internet connectivity on your domain controller. So you want to place it on a standalone server that would have internet so that it can always establish that synchronization handshake. So let's come to the cloud tenant and see what we've got so far. So I would come here. Let me refresh this. Go to Active Directory. So you can see now it says Azure AD Connect enabled, and the last sync was 1 hour ago, even though it's not up to an hour. But it takes some time for this to get updated. So you can see this is now enabled 1 hour ago, and what I have, the method I've chosen is password hash. Now let's go and see what are those objects that were synchronized from my on-premise to the cloud. So if I come here to say users, and you can see this option here that says on-premise sync enabled. Where you say see yes, it means that that user is an on-premise user. So you can see Felix Bill here. You can see LearnTogether here, which is my local administrator. You can see on-premise Azure synchronization, which is also one thing I didn't remember to mention, that to continue with that synchronization, the Azure AD Connect automatically creates a service account. You would always see the service account starting with this sync underscore the name of your domain controller and some random hash number. This is the account that your Azure AD Connect uses to establish that particular sync. And I think, yeah, those are all the users I had synced. I can also come to where I have groups and see where are those groups that I synced. DNS admin, it's one of my DNS update proxy also. Even though these built-in groups, the administrative groups, they are not meant to be part of what you'd sync, but because in my first sync, I'd not filtered the hierarchy of my AD to specify which OU, which container should be synced, so it kind of synced everything. So now you have an hybrid system. What you now begin to think about is how to do your management. For instance, if I need to make changes to users, on-premise users, I'll typically still have to go to my domain controller to make those changes. Then those changes syncs to the cloud. And meanwhile, if I have my cloud users, because I don't have a user right back, those users will typically just remain on the cloud, and I won't be able to manage them from my on premise. So that is that so far. We have questions. Let's bring them up before we call it a day. So if there are no questions,
So I have no
yep.
questions at the moment.
Okay.
Sorry, I just want to
Toib,
have. Is it? Yes, I just want to. Is it possible for us to have like a how do I put it? Like the next class that we're going to have, like idea of what the topic is. So some of us, if we feel an opportunity, we can actually pre-study it ahead. So that makes it more interactive. I just don't know
yeah,
if that's possible.
yeah, it's possible. I actually did share that in the Discord channel if you check, but I could also share it
Oh,
again
I must have
for
missed
each
out
of
on
the,
that.
yeah, for each of the week topics that will be covered. You have it in there, which you can always just run through, and if you want to do some pre-reads before come to class and just use the session to enforce what you had gone through, that makes sense and helps learning.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, you said what, sir?
Yeah, I said it makes sense for you to do that, to do some of those pre-reads before you join the session. So although I'd shared it earlier, I would share it again, and probably maybe a few days before the session, I can still drop it in the chat specifically for the week what we'll be covering so that you can use that as a guide.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Yep. So I would drop the recordings for this in the channel and additional reading materials that you could just scan through. Then also, I don't know, the last time I had shared the labs activities
Thank
that
you.
need to complete. It's important that we complete those activities. You'd typically be using free resources. You could sign up for the uh, free Azure account to complete those activities to further drive on some of these concepts and gain those hands-on experience. Except for whichever one that may typically require that you use infrastructures like here having a server for a domain controller. You can still work around that. When you sign up for your Azure Active Directory, go to the compute section, spin up a VM, make it a domain controller, and try to set up any configuration that involves establishing connectivity within on-premise and a cloud or probably hybrid yourself and see how it works. So that'll be all for now. See you guys next weekend.
Right.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.